The year was 1884, and in the Colorado Territory, the line between law and outlaw was often thinner than the edge of a gunfighter's blade. Justice wore a badge, but it didn't always wear a halo, and sometimes the most dangerous criminals were the ones who looked like heroes, while the most wanted men were the ones fighting for what was right. Sheriff William McKenna had spent 15 years keeping the peace in Silver Creek, a town that attracted every kind of trouble the frontier could produce. He was a good man, a fair man, and a father who would kill anyone who threatened his daughter. That last part was about to be tested in ways he never imagined. Emma McKenna was everything a sheriff's daughter shouldn't be: curious about danger, sympathetic to underdogs, and beautiful enough to turn every head in 3 counties. At 22, she should have been married to some respectable merchant or banker, safely raising children far from the violence that defined her father's world. Instead, she was about to fall in love with the most wanted man in Colorado Territory. Jesse Dalton was the kind of outlaw that made lawmen lose sleep and made women forget their manners. Young, handsome, and deadly with a gun, he rode with a gang that had been terrorizing railroad lines for 2 years. But Jesse wasn't just another thief looking for easy money. He was a man seeking justice for a crime that had destroyed his family and turned him into the very thing he'd once sworn to fight. What nobody in Silver Creek knew was that Jesse Dalton had good reason to hate the law. What Sheriff McKenna didn't know was that his own daughter was about to discover those reasons and choose sides in a war that would tear their family apart. You're about to witness how love can bloom in the most impossible circumstances, how justice and law aren't always the same thing, and how a sheriff's daughter learned that sometimes the badge doesn't make the man makes the badge worthy. This is the story of Emma McKenna, who thought she knew the difference between right and wrong until she met a man who showed her that the world was painted in shades of gray. Of Jesse Dalton, who rode the outlaw trail not for glory or gold, but for truth that no court would hear. Of Sheriff William McKenna, who discovered that protecting his daughter might mean accepting that everything he believed about justice was wrong. Emma had no idea that helping a wounded stranger would put her at the center of a conflict that reached from corrupt railroad barons to the territorial capital. Jesse didn't know that the sheriff's daughter would become the one person willing to believe his story when everyone else had branded him a killer. Sheriff McKenna never imagined that his greatest enemy might be the man who truly deserved his daughter's love. The lines were drawn, the players were in position, and the most dangerous game in the Colorado Territory was about to begin. Because when a sheriff's daughter falls for a wanted man, someone's definition of justice has to change. And in the summer of 1884, in a town called Silver Creek, 3 lives were about to collide in ways that would redefine everything they thought they knew about family, loyalty, and the price of doing what's right when the whole world is watching. The law said Jesse Dalton was a criminal. Emma McKenna's heart said otherwise. And sometimes hearts know truths that badges never learn. Sometimes the most wanted man is exactly the man you need most. The gunshots echoed across Silver Creek's main street like thunder on a clear day, sending shopkeepers diving behind counters and decent folks scrambling for cover. Emma McKenna pressed herself against the mercantile's window, watching her father and his deputies take positions behind wooden barrels and hitching posts. 6 armed men sat their horses in the middle of the street, dust swirling around them like smoke from hell itself. "Emma, get back from that window," Mrs. Garrett hissed from behind the fabric counter. "Those are the Dalton gang, and they didn't come here to buy supplies." But Emma couldn't tear her eyes away from the confrontation unfolding in front of her. She'd heard stories about Jesse Dalton and his men, how they'd robbed 3 trains in 2 months, how they'd shot their way out of an ambush near Colorado Springs, how Jesse himself was faster with a gun than lightning and twice as deadly. What the stories hadn't mentioned was how young he looked. Jesse Dalton sat his black stallion with easy confidence, one hand resting on his thigh, while the other kept his Colt loose in its holster. He couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair that caught the afternoon sunlight and features that belonged in a church social rather than on a wanted poster. When he smiled at something one of his men said, Emma felt her breath catch in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "Jesse Dalton!" Sheriff McKenna's voice carried clearly across the street. You're under arrest for robbery and murder. Surrender now and you'll get a fair trial." Jesse's laugh was warm and rich, not the cackle Emma expected from a hardened criminal. "Now, Sheriff, you know as well as I do that there's no such thing as a fair trial for men like me. Not when Judge Whitmore's got railroad money filling his pockets. The law's the law, Dalton. Drop your weapons." "Which law would that be, Sheriff? The one that says a man can't protect his family? Or the one that says railroad companies can murder innocent farmers and call it progress?" Emma frowned at Jesse's words. She'd never heard of any farmers being murdered, and her father would have told her about something that serious. Wouldn't he? The standoff continued for long, tense minutes, with neither side willing to make the first move. Emma found herself studying Jesse's face, looking for signs of the cold-blooded killer the wanted posters described. Instead, she saw a man who seemed tired rather than vicious, driven rather than cruel. "This is your last warning, Dalton. And this is yours, Sheriff." Jesse's voice carried a note of genuine regret. "We didn't come here to hurt anyone. We came for supplies and information. Let us conduct our business peacefully, and we'll be gone within the hour." "Like hell!" The first shot came from one of Sheriff McKenna's deputies, a nervous young man named Peters, who'd been on the job for less than a month. The bullet went wide, but it shattered the tense standoff like glass. Suddenly, the street erupted in gunfire as both sides opened up. Emma watched in horror as bullets splintered wood and shattered windows around her. One of Jesse's men took a hit in the shoulder, but stayed in his saddle. Deputy Morrison cried out and dove behind a water trough as Jesse's return fire came dangerously close. Through it all, Jesse himself seemed almost supernatural in his calm. He drew his gun with fluid grace, placing his shots with surgical precision. Wounding rather than killing, Emma noticed. Even in the heat of battle, he wasn't trying to murder her father's men. The gunfight lasted less than 3 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Jesse's men were wounded, 1 deputy was clutching a bleeding arm, and everyone was still alive. It could have been a massacre, but somehow it had remained just shy of one. "Next time, Sheriff," Jesse called out as his gang prepared to retreat, "remember that some men become outlaws because the law failed them first." As the 6 riders wheeled their horses toward the edge of town, Jesse's eyes swept across the buildings lining the street. For just a moment, his gaze met Emma's through the mercantile window, and she felt something electric pass between them. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been mockery or courtesy, then spurred his horse after his men. Emma stood frozen at the window long after the dust had settled, her heart pounding not with fear, but with something she couldn't name. She'd just witnessed her first gunfight, seen men try to kill each other in the middle of her peaceful town. She should have been terrified. Instead, she was fascinated. "Emma!" Her father's voice snapped her back to reality. Sheriff McKenna burst through the mercantile door, his face grim with worry and anger. "Are you hurt? Did any of those bullets come through the window?" "I'm fine, Papa," Emma said, finally stepping back from the glass. "Nobody was seriously hurt, were they?" Morrison took a graze on his arm, "But he'll live. Peters is shaken up pretty bad. First time under fire." McKenna's expression darkened. "That was too close, Emma. Dalton's getting bolder, coming right into town in broad daylight. He said something about farmers being murdered." "What did he mean?" McKenna's jaw tightened. "Dalton says a lot of things. Most of them lies designed to make people sympathetic to his cause. Don't let his pretty face fool you, sweetheart. He's a killer, and he's dangerous." Emma nodded, but she couldn't shake the memory of how carefully Jesse had aimed, how he'd wounded rather than killed when he could have done so much worse. "Papa, what if he's telling the truth? What if there really were farmers who—" "Emma!" McKenna's voice carried the tone that ended arguments. "Jesse Dalton is wanted for robbing 3 trains and killing 2 guards. Whatever sob story he's spinning, it doesn't change the fact that he's a criminal. My job is to bring him to justice, not to listen to his excuses." "But what if—" "No what-ifs." McKenna softened his tone slightly. "I know you've got a kind heart, and you want to see the good in everyone. But some men are beyond redemption. Dalton made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences." As Emma walked home with her father, She found herself thinking about Jesse's words and the way he'd looked at her through that window. There had been something in his eyes, pain maybe, or desperation. It hadn't looked like the gaze of a man beyond redemption. That evening, Emma helped her father clean his weapons, while he told her about the increased patrols he was organizing to catch the Dalton gang. She listened with half her attention, while the other half wandered to questions she couldn't voice. What if Jesse Dalton really was innocent of the crimes they charged him with? What if he'd become an outlaw not from greed or cruelty, but from some terrible injustice? "Emma, you're not listening," McKenna said, setting down his rifle with a sigh. "I'm sorry, Papa. I was just thinking about what happened today. It's natural to be shaken up after something like that, but I want you to promise me something." "What?" "If you ever see Jesse Dalton or any of his men around town when I'm not here, you run. Don't try to be brave. Don't try to help anyone. You just run and find the nearest deputy. Promise me." Emma met her father's eyes and saw the genuine fear there. Not for himself, but for her. "I promise, Papa." But even as she spoke the words, Emma wasn't sure she meant them. Because Jesse Dalton hadn't looked like a man who would hurt innocent people. He'd looked like a man carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear alone. And against all logic and everything she'd been taught about right and wrong, Emma found herself wondering what that burden might be. 3 days later, she would find out. 3 days later, Emma McKenna would discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is start asking questions about justice in a world where justice is decided by men with money rather than men with morals. 3 days later, everything she thought she knew about her father, her town, and herself would change forever. Because Jesse Dalton was coming back to Silver Creek, and this time, he wasn't coming for supplies. He was coming for the truth. Emma couldn't sleep. For 3 nights since the gunfight, she'd lain awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the confrontation and every word Jesse Dalton had spoken. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind, but they competed with something stronger, curiosity about a man who robbed trains but didn't kill when he could have. On the 4th morning, Emma made a decision that would change her life forever. She would ride out to Miller's Creek to pick wildflowers, an innocent activity that would take her along the same route the Dalton gang had used to escape town. She told herself she was just getting fresh air, but deep down she knew she was hoping for answers to questions she couldn't stop asking. Miller's Creek was 5 miles east of Silver Creek, flowing through a valley thick with cottonwoods and wild roses. Emma had been coming here since childhood, finding peace in the sound of running water and the privacy of trees that blocked the view from the main road. It was the perfect place to think, and thinking was what she needed most. She'd been picking flowers for an hour when she heard the horse. The sound of hoofbeats on soft earth made Emma freeze, her heart suddenly pounding. She was alone, miles from town, with nothing but a small derringer in her saddlebag, a weapon her father had insisted she carry, but one she'd never had cause to use. "Easy there," came a familiar voice from the trees. "I'm not here to hurt you." Jesse Dalton emerged from the cottonwoods, leading his black stallion, and Emma felt her breath catch all over again. Up close, he was even more handsome than he'd appeared during the gunfight, tall and lean, with intelligent dark eyes and a smile that managed to be both dangerous and reassuring. "You're the sheriff's daughter," Jesse said, stopping a respectful distance away. It wasn't a question. "Emma McKenna," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "And you're Jesse Dalton." "Guilty as charged," his smile widened slightly, "though not of everything they say I'm guilty of." Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception or violence. She found neither. "What are you doing here?" "Same thing you are, I expect. Thinking. This is a peaceful spot." "How do you know what I'm thinking about?" Jesse's expression grew serious. "Because you were watching during the gunfight. Really watching, not just hiding. And you had questions in your eyes." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What kind of questions?" "The same ones I had when I was your age. Questions about whether the men wearing badges are always the good ones, and whether the men they're chasing are always the bad ones." "And what did you learn?" Jesse was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I learned that the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. It's divided into people who do the right thing when it's easy and people who do the right thing when it's hard. Which are you? That depends on who you ask. Jesse stepped closer, and Emma noticed he kept his hands visible and away from his weapons. Your father would say I'm a killer and a thief. The families I've helped would say I'm something else entirely. What families? The ones who lost their farms when the Denver and Colorado Railroad decided their land was worth more than their lives. The ones who were murdered when they refused to sell for pennies on the dollar. Emma frowned. I've never heard of any murders. My father would have investigated. Your father's a good man, Miss McKenna. But he only investigates crimes that get reported. And it's hard to report a crime when the people with the power to investigate are the same ones committing it. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. Jesse's voice carried weight that spoke of personal experience. Tell me, has your father ever mentioned a farmer named Thomas Dalton? Emma's breath caught. Dalton? Are you related to... My father, shot down in his own fields by railroad agents who wanted his water rights. The local sheriff ruled it a self-defense, said my father drew first. But my father never owned a gun in his life. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She searched Jesse's face for signs of deception and found only pain and conviction. If that's true, why didn't you go to the territorial authorities? Why become an outlaw? Jesse's laugh was bitter. I tried the legal route first, spent 2 years writing letters, filing complaints, gathering evidence. You know what I learned? The territorial authorities are bought and paid for by the same railroad money that killed my father. So you decided to take the law into your own hands. I decided to take back what was stolen. Every train we rob is carrying money that belongs to families like mine. Every dollar we redistribute is justice that the courts won't provide. Emma stared at this man who stood before her, not the cold-blooded killer of the wanted posters, but someone fighting a war against corruption with the only weapons he had left. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because you're asking the right questions, and because your father is a good man who deserves to know the truth, even if that truth is inconvenient for powerful people. You want me to convince my father to stop chasing you? I want you to convince him to start chasing the real criminals, the ones who hide behind corporate charters and political connections while they murder innocent people. Emma felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Believing Jesse meant accepting that everything she'd been taught about justice was wrong, but not believing him meant ignoring the sincerity in his eyes and the pain in his voice. I need proof, she said finally. Jesse reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather portfolio. Legal documents showing how the railroad acquired my father's land. Witness statements from neighbors who saw what really happened. A letter from the county clerk admitting he was paid to falsify the property transfer. Emma accepted the portfolio with trembling hands. Why do you carry this with you? Because someday I hope to find someone with the power and integrity to use it. Maybe that someone is your father. And if it's not, if he doesn't believe you, Jesse's expression grew sad. Then I'll keep fighting the only way I know how. And good men like your father will keep trying to arrest me for crimes I'm only committing because the system failed me first. Emma clutched the portfolio against her chest, feeling the weight of evidence that could change everything. This is dangerous for me. If my father finds out I've been talking to you, he'll think I corrupted his innocent daughter. Jesse's smile was gentle but serious. Miss McKenna, you have a choice to make. You can pretend this conversation never happened, give me back those papers, and go on believing that the world is simple and justice always wears a badge. Or you can look at that evidence and decide for yourself whether some laws are worth breaking when the law itself is broken. Emma met his eyes, seeing not a criminal, but a man who'd been forced to choose between justice and legality. If I look at this evidence, if I try to help you, what then? Then maybe we can find a way to stop the real criminals without good men like your father getting caught in the crossfire. And if we can't, Jesse's voice was soft but firm, then at least we'll know we tried to do the right thing, even when it was hard. As Emma rode back toward Silver Creek with Jesse's evidence hidden in her saddlebag, she realized that her life had just divided into before and after. Before she'd known that the man her father was hunting had good reasons for his rebellion. After she'd learned that sometimes the most wanted men were the ones the world needed most, she'd promised her father she would run if she ever encountered Jesse Dalton. Instead, she'd listened to his story and accepted his evidence. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That evening, as Sheriff McKenna cleaned his guns and planned new strategies for capturing the Dalton gang, Emma sat across from him, knowing she was harboring secrets that could destroy their relationship. The evidence burning in her possession could prove Jesse's innocence, or it could be an elaborate deception designed to turn a sheriff's daughter against her own father. Only one thing was certain. Emma McKenna could no longer pretend the world was simple. She'd met Jesse Dalton, and he'd shown her that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is start believing in someone everyone else has given up on. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether she had the courage to be the kind of person who did the right thing when it was hard. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between loyalty to her father and loyalty to the truth. And Jesse Dalton would be waiting for her answer. Emma spent 3 sleepless nights studying Jesse's evidence, spreading the documents across her bedroom floor by lamplight after her father had gone to sleep. The papers painted a picture of systematic corruption that made her stomach turn. Forged land deeds, bribed officials, and witness statements describing murders that had been ruled accidental or justified. The most damning piece was a letter from railroad executive Harrison Whitmore, Judge Whitmore's brother, explicitly ordering the removal of farmers who wouldn't sell their land. The letter was signed and dated 2 days before Thomas Dalton's death. On the 4th morning, Emma made her decision. She would show the evidence to her father and trust that his commitment to justice was stronger than his loyalty to the system that employed him. "Papa," she said as they shared breakfast, "I need to show you something important." Sheriff McKenna looked up from his coffee, noting the serious tone in his daughter's voice. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma placed the leather portfolio on the table between them. "Evidence that might change your mind about Jesse Dalton." McKenna's expression darkened. "Emma, where did you get this?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is what's inside." "It matters to me." McKenna's voice rose with alarm. "Please tell me you didn't seek out that outlaw against my direct orders." Emma met her father's eyes steadily. "I promised I would run if I encountered Jesse Dalton. I didn't promise I wouldn't listen if he had something important to say." McKenna's face went pale with a mixture of anger and fear. "Emma, do you have any idea how dangerous—" "Please, Papa, just look at the evidence before you decide I'm foolish or corrupted. Look at it with the same objectivity you'd bring to any other case." For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across a table that suddenly felt like a chasm. Finally, McKenna opened the portfolio and began examining the documents with professional thoroughness. Emma watched her father's face change as he read. Skepticism gave way to concern, concern to anger, and anger to something that might have been horror. When he finally looked up, his eyes held the weight of unwelcome truth. "If these documents are genuine," McKenna said slowly, "then I've been hunting an innocent man while the real criminals hide behind corporate charters." "Are they genuine?" McKenna studied the papers again, noting official seals and signatures he recognized. "They appear to be." "But Emma, even if Dalton's father was murdered, that doesn't justify train robbery and—" "What would you have done?" Emma interrupted. "If someone murdered me and the legal system protected my killers, what would you have done?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. McKenna looked at his daughter, his only child, the light of his life, and knew exactly what he would have done. He would have burned the world down to get justice for her. "That's different," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "How? Because you wear a badge? Because you trust the system? Papa, what if the system is broken? What if good men like you are being used to protect bad men with money?" McKenna set the documents aside and rubbed his temples. "Emma, even if you're right about Dalton's motives, I can't just stop enforcing the law because I disagree with it. I took an oath to serve justice, not to serve the railroad. Sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're not." Emma leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Papa, Jesse Dalton isn't your enemy. He's fighting the same corruption you should be fighting. By robbing trains and putting innocent people at risk? By taking back money that was stolen from murdered farmers and giving it to their families? By being the justice system when the justice system fails?" McKenna stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over Silver Creek's main street. Emma, you're asking me to choose between my duty as a sheriff and my conscience as a man. I'm asking you to remember that your first duty is to justice, not to men who pervert justice for profit. And if I'm wrong, if Dalton is manipulating you with forged documents and lies, if I let a criminal go free because my daughter fell for a handsome outlaw's sob story, the accusation stung, partly because Emma couldn't entirely dismiss it. Then we'll find out together. But Papa, what if you're wrong? What if you arrest an innocent man while the real criminals continue murdering families? McKenna turned back to face his daughter, seeing determination in her eyes that reminded him painfully of her mother. When did you become so passionate about justice? When I learned that justice and law aren't always the same thing. You learned that from Jesse Dalton. I learned that from thinking for myself. Emma's voice softened. Papa, I know you're a good man. I know you want to do the right thing. But sometimes doing the right thing means questioning everything you've been told to believe. McKenna returned to the table, studying the evidence again with new eyes. If I pursue this, if I investigate these allegations against the railroad, it could destroy my career. Judge Whitmore has influence that reaches all the way to the territorial capital. And if you don't pursue it, how many more families will die? The question hit McKenna like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter and saw not the innocent child he'd been trying to protect, but a young woman capable of making moral choices that shamed his own caution. What exactly are you proposing I do? Emma felt a flutter of hope. Meet with Jesse, hear his full story. Let him show you evidence he couldn't carry in one portfolio. Give him a chance to prove that he's fighting for justice, not against it. You want me to meet secretly with the most wanted man in Colorado Territory? I want you to meet with a man who might be the key to exposing corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government. McKenna was quiet for a long time, weighing duty against conscience, law against justice. Finally, he spoke. If I do this, if I meet with Dalton, you stay away from him. This isn't a game, Emma. If you're wrong about him, if he's as dangerous as I believe, I won't be able to protect you. And if I'm right, if he's everything I believe him to be, McKenna's smile was sad and proud. Then my daughter has shown me that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. That evening, Emma rode back to Miller's Creek with her father's agreement to meet Jesse and hear his full story. She found Jesse waiting by the creek as if he'd known she would return. Your father agreed to meet with me? Jesse asked, studying Emma's face for signs of hope or disappointment. Tomorrow night, midnight at the old Hendricks place outside town. Jesse nodded slowly. He could be setting a trap, bringing deputies to arrest me. He could be, but he won't. How can you be so sure? Emma looked into Jesse's eyes and saw the same question she'd been asking herself all day. Because I know my father, and because you know him too, or you wouldn't have trusted me with evidence that could get you hanged. Miss McKenna, Emma, you're taking a terrible risk. If this goes wrong, if your father decides I'm beyond redemption, you'll be caught between us. I'm already caught between you, Emma replied. The question is whether I'll be caught between two enemies or two allies. Jesse stepped closer, close enough that Emma could see the determination and gentleness warring in his dark eyes. Whatever happens tomorrow night, I want you to know that meeting you has reminded me there are still good people in the world worth fighting for. Emma felt her heart race at his words and his proximity. Jesse, I know, he said softly. I feel it too, but we both know how impossible this is. Why does it have to be impossible? Jesse's smile was sad and beautiful. Because you're a sheriff's daughter, and I'm a wanted man. Because your world and mine are separated by more than just badges and wanted posters. What if they don't have to be? What if tomorrow night changes everything? Then maybe we'll find out what's possible when impossible people refuse to accept impossible situations. As Emma rode home through the gathering darkness, she realized she was no longer just fighting for justice or truth. She was fighting for the possibility of a future where love could bridge the gap between law and outlaw, between duty and desire. Tomorrow night would determine whether that future was possible or whether she was falling in love with a man she could never have. Either way, Emma McKenna had chosen her side. Now she had to live with the consequences. The abandoned Hendricks place sat on a hill overlooking Silver Creek, its broken windows and sagging roof testament to dreams that had died with their dreamers. Emma arrived first, her heart pounding as she tied her horse to a rotting fence post and checked the loads in her derringer. She'd insisted on being present for the meeting between her father and Jesse, despite both men's objections. Sheriff McKenna arrived precisely at midnight, his own horse's hoofbeats muffled by careful riding through soft earth. He dismounted with the wariness of a man walking into what might be his own death, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" McKenna asked as he joined Emma in the shadow of the ruined house. "More sure than I've been about anything in my life. If this goes bad—" "It won't," Emma said with more confidence than she felt. Jesse materialized from the darkness like a ghost, moving with the silence of a man who'd spent 2 years avoiding capture. He approached slowly, hands visible and away from his weapons, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders. "Sheriff McKenna," Jesse said formally, "thank you for coming." "Don't thank me yet," McKenna replied. "My daughter believes you're an innocent man fighting for justice. I think you're a criminal who's corrupted her with pretty words and a handsome face. One of us is wrong." "Yes, sir. One of us is." The two men studied each other in the moonlight, the lawman and the outlaw, the father and the man his daughter had chosen to believe in. Emma felt the weight of history pressing down on this moment, understanding that what happened here would determine not just Jesse's fate, but her own. "Show me your evidence," McKenna said finally. Jesse opened his saddlebags and began producing documents, more papers than Emma had seen, creating a pile of evidence that spoke to years of careful investigation and documentation. "This is my father's original deed to our land," Jesse began, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Signed and witnessed in 1879, and this is the forged deed the railroad used to claim ownership after his death. Note the different handwriting and the convenient backdating." McKenna examined both documents with professional thoroughness, comparing signatures and studying the paper quality. "The forgery is obvious once you know what to look for," he admitted. "This is the coroner's report on my father's death," Jesse continued. "Shot 3 times in the back while allegedly drawing on railroad agents. But my father was left-handed, and the gun they claimed he drew was in his right hand." Emma watched her father's face change as he read the report. She could see him applying his investigative experience to evidence he'd never been allowed to examine. "Why wasn't this discrepancy noted at the time?" McKenna asked. "Because the coroner was paid to see what the railroad wanted him to see. This letter documents the payment, $50 to rule the death justified." For the next hour, Jesse methodically presented evidence of a conspiracy that reached from local officials to territorial authorities. Each document built on the last, creating an undeniable picture of systematic corruption and murder. "The worst part," Jesse said as he neared the end of his presentation, "is that my father wasn't the only victim. At least 12 families were murdered or driven from their land. Their names are all here, along with witness statements from survivors." McKenna studied the list of names, recognizing several as families who'd supposedly moved back east or decided farming wasn't for them. The official explanations had never quite made sense, but he'd accepted them because questioning would have meant confronting powerful interests. "If all this is true," McKenna said slowly, "then I've been enforcing laws designed to protect murderers while hunting men trying to expose them." "Yes, sir, you have." The simple honesty of Jesse's response hit McKenna harder than any accusation could have. "So what do you want from me? What am I supposed to do with this information? Help us prove it in court. Use your authority to demand a real investigation. Give the families justice instead of covering up their murders. And in return, I'll surrender myself for trial if you can guarantee that trial will be fair and that the evidence will be heard." Emma felt her breath catch. "Jesse, you can't." "I can and I will," Jesse replied, his eyes never leaving McKenna's face. "I never wanted to be an outlaw sheriff. I became one because the system failed me. If you can fix the system, I'll trust it again." McKenna was quiet for a long time, weighing the implications of what Jesse was proposing. Judge Whitmore will never allow this evidence in his courtroom. He's too deeply connected to the railroad. Then we go over his head. Federal court, territorial authorities, the press. Someone with integrity will listen. And if no one listens? If the corruption runs too deep? Jesse's smile was sad but determined. Then at least we'll know we tried to do the right thing. McKenna looked at his daughter, seeing the hope and fear warring in her eyes. Emma, you understand what you're asking me to do? If I help Dalton, I'll be ending my career and probably making enemies of some very powerful people. Papa, what's a career worth if it's built on protecting murderers? The question hung in the air like morning mist, simple and devastatingly clear. McKenna looked from his daughter to the man she believed in, seeing not the hardened criminal of the wanted posters, but someone driven by the same desire for justice that had made him become a lawman in the first place. Mr. Dalton, McKenna said finally, I need time to think about this, and I need to verify some of this evidence independently. How much time? A week, maybe 2. Jesse nodded. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you stay away from my daughter. She's already taken too many risks for you. Emma started to protest, but Jesse raised his hand gently. Your father's right. If I'm going to surrender myself for trial, I can't have you connected to me any more than you already are. But Jesse, Emma. Jesse's voice was soft but firm. Your father is offering me something I never thought I'd have again. Hope. The least I can do is keep you safe, while he decides whether that hope is justified. McKenna studied the interaction between his daughter and the outlaw, seeing something that made his chest tighten with understanding. Dalton, are you in love with my daughter? Jesse met the sheriff's eyes without flinching. Yes, sir, I am. And Emma, are you in love with him? Emma felt her heart racing as both men waited for her answer. Yes, Papa, I am. McKenna closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. When he opened them again, his expression was resigned but determined. Then God help us all, because this just got infinitely more complicated. As the three of them prepared to leave the abandoned homestead, each understood that their lives had just changed irrevocably. McKenna was no longer just a sheriff enforcing the law. He was a man choosing between justice and career, between protecting his daughter and accepting her choices. Jesse was no longer just an outlaw running from the law. He was a man who'd found someone willing to believe in his innocence and fight for his redemption. The possibility of surrender and trial meant hope for vindication, but also the very real risk of execution if the system remained corrupt. Emma was no longer just a sheriff's daughter caught between duty and desire. She was a woman who'd helped broker a meeting that could either save the man she loved or destroy him. She'd forced her father to confront uncomfortable truths about the system he served, and there was no going back from that knowledge. Sheriff, Jesse said as he prepared to mount his horse, whatever you decide, I want you to know that your daughter is the bravest person I've ever met. She risked everything to give us this chance. McKenna looked at Emma, seeing not his little girl, but a woman who'd made choices that could have gotten her killed. She gets that from her mother, he said quietly. Her mother never could stand to see injustice go unchallenged either. Papa, Emma said softly, what are you going to do? McKenna was quiet for a moment, studying the evidence Jesse had shown him and thinking about the implications of what he'd learned. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to investigate these deaths properly, regardless of who it makes uncomfortable. And if your investigation confirms Jesse's story, then I'll help him get the fair trial he deserves, even if it means ending my own career. Jesse felt something tight loosen in his chest. Hope, tentative but real. Sheriff, if you do this, if you help me prove the truth, you'll be making powerful enemies. Son, I made powerful enemies the day I pinned on this badge and swore to serve justice. I just forgot that for a while. As Jesse disappeared into the darkness and Emma and her father rode home together, both knew that their relationship had fundamentally changed. They were no longer just father and daughter. They were allies in a fight for justice that would test everything they believed about law, loyalty, and love. Papa, Emma said as they neared Silver Creek, are you angry with me for arranging this meeting? McKenna was quiet for a long moment, "I'm terrified for you," he said finally, "but I'm not angry. You did what you thought was right, even when it was dangerous. That takes courage." What happens now? Now I start investigating murders that some very powerful people want to stay buried, and you stay away from Jesse Dalton until I can figure out whether justice is possible in this territory. And if it's not possible? McKenna's smile was grim but determined. Then we'll make it possible. Because sometimes, sweetheart, the most important battles are the ones everyone tells you you can't win. As father and daughter rode through the sleeping streets of Silver Creek, both understood that they'd crossed a line that night. They'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over safety, and hope over resignation. The consequences of that choice would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But for the first time in months, Emma felt like she was fighting for something worth the risk. And for the first time in years, Sheriff McKenna felt like he was being the lawman he'd always meant to be. Sheriff McKenna's investigation began quietly, with visits to families who'd supposedly moved away, an examination of property records that had gathered dust for years. What he found in those forgotten files made his blood run cold. Jesse Dalton hadn't exaggerated the scope of the conspiracy. If anything, he'd understated it. Emma watched her father change over the course of a week, saw the weight of terrible knowledge settle on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He became quieter, more thoughtful, and she often caught him staring out the window with the expression of a man whose faith in everything he'd believed had been shattered. "How many families?" Emma asked one evening as they sat across from each other at dinner, the question that had been haunting both of them. 15 confirmed dead, maybe 20 more driven off their land through threats and violence. McKenna's voice was hollow. All so the railroad could build a spur line through the valley and claim mineral rights that were worth millions. And Judge Whitmore knew? Judge Whitmore ordered it. I found correspondence between him and his brother at the railroad. They planned the whole thing. Identify families who wouldn't sell, manufacture legal justifications for their removal, silence anyone who tried to expose the truth. Emma felt sick. What about the other officials? The territorial authorities? Bought and paid for, every one of them. The corruption runs all the way to the capital. McKenna pushed his food around his plate, appetite gone. Emma, I've been enforcing laws designed to protect murderers while hunting the one man trying to bring them to justice. What are you going to do? Before McKenna could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Emma felt her heart leap, hoping it might be Jesse, but when her father opened the door, Judge Whitmore himself stood on their threshold. "Sheriff McKenna," Whitmore said with oily courtesy, "I hope you don't mind an unannounced visit." "Judge," McKenna replied carefully, "what brings you here so late? Concerns about your recent activities. May I come in?" McKenna stepped aside reluctantly, and Emma felt ice form in her stomach as Judge Whitmore entered their home. He was a small, neat man with pale eyes and the kind of smile that never reached beyond his lips. "Miss McKenna," Whitmore said, nodding to Emma, "you've grown into a lovely young woman. Your father must be very proud." Emma managed a polite response while her mind raced. How much did Whitmore know about their investigation? "Sheriff," Whitmore continued, settling into a chair without invitation, "I understand you've been asking questions about some old property disputes. Stirring up dust that's better left settled?" "Just doing my job, Judge." "Following up on some discrepancies I noticed." Whitmore's smile grew sharper. "Admirable thoroughness, but sometimes thoroughness can be misguided. These property disputes were resolved years ago through proper legal channels." "Were they?" McKenna's voice carried a note of challenge that made Emma's heart race. "Of course they were. Are you suggesting there were irregularities in my court?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Emma watched her father weigh his words, understanding that what he said next could determine whether they lived or died. "I'm suggesting that some of those cases might benefit from fresh examination," McKenna said carefully. Whitmore's eyes grew cold. "Sheriff, I hope you're not allowing yourself to be influenced by unsavory sources. I've heard rumors that certain outlaws have been spreading malicious lies about respected citizens." Emma felt her blood freeze. Whitmore knew about her meetings with Jesse. "I investigate all credible allegations," McKenna replied, "regardless of their source. Even when those sources are wanted criminals, Even when those allegations are designed to discredit the very system you've sworn to uphold? McKenna met Whitmore's stare directly. Especially then. The silence that followed was thick with threat. Whitmore's smile never wavered, but something deadly moved behind his pale eyes. Sheriff, you've served this community faithfully for 15 years. It would be a shame if misguided loyalties were to tarnish that record. Is that a threat, Judge? It's friendly advice, from one public servant to another. Whitmore stood, straightening his coat. Some truths are too dangerous to pursue. Some battles are too big to win. Wise men know when to stop asking questions. And foolish men? Whitmore's smile became genuinely warm for the first time, and it was terrifying. Foolish men end up like Thomas Dalton, shot down in their own fields for drawing on men who were faster. The threat was clear, and Emma saw her father stiffen with understanding. Whitmore wasn't just warning them. He was confessing to murder while simultaneously threatening the same fate. Judge, McKenna said quietly, I think you should leave now. Of course, but Sheriff, do consider what I've said. You have a lovely daughter. It would be terrible if anything happened to her because of her father's poor judgment. After Whitmore left, Emma and her father sat in stunned silence, processing what had just occurred. He threatened to kill us, Emma said finally. He threatened to kill you, McKenna corrected, his voice shaking with rage. He knows I'll back down to protect you. Will you? McKenna looked at his daughter, seeing the woman she'd become and the courage she'd inherited from her mother. Emma, if I stop investigating now, how many more families will die? How many more men like Jesse Dalton will be forced to become outlaws because the system failed them? But if you continue, we might both end up dead. Yes, we might. Emma felt the weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. Papa, what if there was another way? What if Jesse surrendered himself for trial, but we made sure the truth came out regardless of what happened in court? What do you mean? I mean we document everything, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every detail of the conspiracy. We send copies to newspapers in Denver and Colorado Springs, to territorial authorities in other districts, to anyone who might listen. McKenna's eyes lit with understanding. Create so much publicity that they can't suppress the truth. Exactly. Even if they kill us, even if they convict Jesse, the evidence would still exist. The truth would still come out. It's dangerous, Emma. If Whitmore realizes what we're doing, then we make sure he doesn't realize until it's too late. McKenna studied his daughter's face, seeing determination that reminded him painfully of her mother. Emma, if we do this, there's no going back. We'll be declaring war on some of the most powerful men in the territory. Then we'd better make sure we win. That night, Emma slipped out of the house and rode to Miller's Creek, knowing Jesse would be waiting even though they'd agreed she should stay away. She found him by the water, tension in every line of his body. Emma, you shouldn't be here. If your father finds out. My father sent me, Emma said, and watched Jesse's eyes widen with surprise. What? Judge Whitmore visited us tonight. He threatened to kill us both if Papa continues investigating. We need to accelerate our timeline. Emma quickly related the evening's events, watching Jesse's expression grow darker with each detail. He actually confessed to murdering my father, while threatening to do the same to us. Jesse, we can't wait for a perfect solution. We need to act now before Whitmore decides we know too much to live. Jesse was quiet for a moment, thinking. What's your plan? Full disclosure, we document everything and release it to every newspaper and authority figure we can reach. Create so much publicity that they can't suppress the truth. And me? Emma met his eyes, seeing the fear and hope warring there. You surrender yourself publicly in front of witnesses so they can't just make you disappear. If you're going to face trial, we make sure the whole territory is watching. Jesse reached for Emma's hand, intertwining their fingers. Emma, if this goes wrong, if they convict me and execute me, I need you to know something. What? Meeting you has been worth every risk I've taken. You've reminded me that there are still good people in the world worth fighting for. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. Jesse, you're going to survive this. We're going to prove your innocence, expose the conspiracy, and find a way to build a life together. And if we can't, then we'll know we died fighting for something that mattered." Jesse leaned forward and kissed Emma gently, a kiss that tasted of hope and desperation and love that might have to last a lifetime. "Tomorrow," he said against her lips, "we find out if justice is possible in Colorado territory." "Tomorrow," Emma agreed, "we change everything." As Emma rode home through the darkness, she understood that her childhood was officially over. Tomorrow she would help the man she loved surrender himself for trial, knowing he might hang for crimes he didn't commit. But she would also help expose the truth that powerful men had killed to protect. And sometimes the truth was worth any price, even if that price was everything. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with the promise of a day that would change everything. Emma stood on her porch watching the sunrise, knowing that by sunset, either justice would triumph or everyone she loved would be dead. The plan they'd devised was audacious and dangerous. Jesse would surrender himself publicly in the town square at noon, while simultaneously, copies of evidence documenting the railroad conspiracy would be delivered to newspapers across Colorado territory. Sheriff McKenna emerged from the house carrying a leather satchel filled with documents they'd spent all night copying and organizing. His face was grim but determined, the expression of a man who'd made peace with necessary risks. "Emma, it's not too late to change your mind about this," McKenna said quietly. "You could take the morning stage to Denver, be safely away before any of this begins." "Papa, we've talked about this. I'm not leaving. Judge Whitmore won't hesitate to kill you to protect his secrets. Then we'll make sure his secrets are already exposed before he has the chance." Emma adjusted the ribbon in her hair, a small act of normalcy in an abnormal day. "Besides, someone needs to witness Jesse's surrender to make sure it's handled fairly." McKenna studied his daughter's face, seeing resolution that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with her mother 25 years ago. "Emma, if this goes wrong, if they arrest me or worse, I want you to know that I'm proud of the woman you've become." "Nothing's going to go wrong," Emma said with more confidence than she felt. "We have the truth on our side." "The truth doesn't stop bullets, sweetheart." At 10 o'clock, riders left Silver Creek carrying packets of evidence to newspaper offices in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Boulder. By evening, the story of the railroad conspiracy would be in the hands of journalists across the territory, regardless of what happened to the people who'd exposed it. At 11:30, Emma stood in the town square watching citizens gather for what they'd been told was an important announcement. She recognized most of the faces: shopkeepers, farmers, ranchers, families who lived in Silver Creek for years without knowing that their sheriff had been unknowingly protecting murderers. Judge Whitmore arrived precisely at noon, flanked by 6 heavily armed men who looked more like hired killers than court officers. Emma felt her heart sink as she realized Whitmore had no intention of allowing Jesse to surrender peacefully. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore announced to the gathered crowd, "we're here today to arrest the notorious outlaw Jesse Dalton, who has agreed to surrender himself for trial." At exactly 12 o'clock, Jesse Dalton rode into Silver Creek's main square, with his hands raised and his weapons conspicuously absent. He sat his horse with calm dignity while murmurs ran through the crowd. This wasn't the savage killer they'd been expecting. "I am Jesse Dalton," he announced clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the square. "I surrender myself voluntarily for trial with the understanding that I will be allowed to present evidence of my innocence and the crimes I've been fighting to expose." Judge Whitmore stepped forward, his pale eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Mr. Dalton, you are under arrest for train robbery, murder, and crimes against the territory of Colorado. You will be taken immediately to the territorial prison to await execution." "Execution?" Emma called out, stepping forward. "What about a trial?" Whitmore's smile was cold. "Miss McKenna, Mr. Dalton is a confessed criminal. His guilt is not in question." Sheriff McKenna moved to stand beside his daughter, his own voice carrying authority. "Judge, every man deserves a fair trial. That's the law." "The law is what I say it is, Sheriff. And I say this man hangs at dawn." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Even in frontier justice, summary execution without trial was considered barbaric. "Your Honor," Jesse said calmly, "I have evidence that will interest the court. Evidence of crimes committed by men in positions of authority. The only evidence that interests me is the evidence of your guilt. Whitmore nodded to his hired guns. Take him. As Whitmore's men moved toward Jesse, Sheriff McKenna stepped directly into their path. Judge, I can't allow you to execute a man without trial. It's not legal and it's not right. Sheriff, you're interfering with the administration of justice. No, I'm preventing the administration of injustice. The tension in the square was thick enough to cut with a knife. Emma watched dozens of faces around her, seeing confusion and growing anger as citizens realized they were witnessing something that had nothing to do with justice. Judge Whitmore, called out Tom McDonald, the store owner, why can't this man have a proper trial? What are you afraid he might say? I'm not afraid of anything a criminal might say, Whitmore snapped, but his voice carried a note of desperation. Then let him say it, called another voice. Let him present his evidence. More voices joined in, and Emma felt hope flicker as she realized the town was turning against Whitmore's heavy-handed tactics. People of Silver Creek, Jesse said, his voice carrying clearly across the square. I have evidence that Judge Whitmore and his brother at the Denver and Colorado Railroad have been murdering innocent families to steal their land. I have documents proving corruption, bribery, and conspiracy reaching the highest levels of territorial government. Lies, Whitmore shouted. Desperate lies from a condemned man. Then why won't you let me present the evidence in court? Jesse shot back. If they're lies, prove it. Sheriff McKenna stepped forward, pulling a thick folder from his satchel. Because I've seen the evidence, and it's not lies. Judge O, you've been using your office to protect murderers while prosecuting innocent men. Whitmore's face went pale with rage. Sheriff, you're under arrest for treason and conspiracy. No, Judge, McKenna replied calmly. You are. What happened next occurred so quickly that later witnesses would disagree on the exact sequence of events. Whitmore's hired guns reached for their weapons. Sheriff McKenna drew his pistol. Jesse Dalton, despite being unarmed, somehow produced a hidden derringer from his boot. But it was Emma who moved fastest. Seeing one of Whitmore's men aiming directly at her father, Emma pulled her own small gun and fired without hesitation. The man screamed and dropped his weapon, clutching his shoulder. In the chaos that followed, Sheriff McKenna's deputies, men who'd served him loyally for years, sided with their sheriff against Whitmore's hired killers. When the gun smoke cleared, Judge Whitmore lay dead in the dust with Jesse's derringer bullet in his heart. 3 of his hired guns were wounded, the rest had surrendered, and the citizens of Silver Creek stood in stunned silence as they processed what they'd witnessed. Jesse, Emma called out, running to where he'd taken cover behind a water trough. Are you hurt? I'm fine, he replied, holstering his weapon and standing slowly. But everything just changed. Sheriff McKenna approached them both, his expression grim but satisfied. Judge Whitmore drew first. Everyone saw it. You shot in self-defense. What happens now? Emma asked. Now we hold a real trial, McKenna replied, with a real judge, real evidence, and real justice. 6 months later, Jesse Dalton stood in a federal courtroom in Denver as a jury foreman read the verdict that would determine his fate. In the matter of Colorado Territory versus Jesse Dalton, on the charges of train robbery, we find the defendant not guilty by reason of necessity and justification. On the charges of murder, we find the defendant not guilty by reason of self-defense. The courtroom erupted in cheers as Emma threw herself into Jesse's arms, tears of relief streaming down her face. The evidence they'd gathered had done more than clear Jesse's name. It had exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial government and led to arrests and convictions that would reshape Colorado politics for decades. As they walked out of the courthouse as free citizens, Sheriff McKenna clapped Jesse on the shoulder. Son, what are your plans now that you're no longer a wanted man? Jesse looked at Emma, seeing his future in her eyes. I was thinking of settling down, maybe starting a family. If a certain sheriff's daughter would have me. Jesse Dalton, Emma said with a smile bright enough to light up the Denver sky. Are you proposing to me in front of my father? I am. Then I accept. But only if you promise me one thing. What's that? That we'll always fight for justice, even when it's hard, even when everyone tells us we can't win. Jesse kissed her then, right there on the courthouse steps in front of half of Denver, and when they broke apart, his smile was radiant with hope. Emma McKenna, he said, I promise we'll spend our lives proving that love and justice are stronger than corruption and fear. Sheriff McKenna watched his daughter kiss the man she'd saved from execution and felt his heart swell with pride. Emma had grown from a girl who accepted what she was told into a woman who questioned everything, who fought for truth even when that fight seemed impossible. A year later, Emma Dalton stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching her husband work with horses that had never known violence or fear. Their land was peaceful, their neighbors were honest, and their future stretched ahead with unlimited possibilities. "Any regrets?" Jesse asked as he joined her on the porch, using the question that had become their private joke. "Only that it took a gunfight in the town square for people to realize that justice is worth fighting for," Emma replied. "And you? Any regrets about marrying a former outlaw?" Emma looked into the eyes of the man who'd shown her that sometimes the most wanted people are exactly the ones the world needs most. "Only that we didn't meet sooner." As the sun set over Colorado territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, Emma and Jesse Dalton stood together, planning a future built on the foundation they'd fought to create. A world where justice wasn't for sale, where truth mattered more than power, and where love could triumph over any obstacle. Their love story had begun with a gunfight and a choice between law and justice. It had been tested by corruption, threatened by violence, and nearly destroyed by men who believed money could buy anything. But it had survived because Emma and Jesse had learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach. Sometimes the most precious things in life are worth any risk to protect. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for them, impossible love stories have the most perfect endings of all. And so, in the unforgiving landscape of Colorado territory, a sheriff's daughter learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is start asking questions about justice. Emma McKenna discovered that loving someone means believing in them, even when the whole world says you're wrong, and sometimes that belief can move mountains. Jesse Dalton proved that not all outlaws are criminals, and not all criminals wear badges. His fight for justice showed that sometimes the law and what's right are two very different things, and that good men can be forced to choose between legal and moral when the system fails the innocent. Sheriff William McKenna found the courage to admit that 15 years of loyal service had been built on protecting the wrong people. His transformation from dutiful lawman to champion of justice showed that it's never too late to choose what's right over what's convenient. Together, they proved that love and justice make powerful allies when they stand against corruption and fear. Emma's courage in challenging everything she'd been taught, Jesse's determination to fight for truth despite the cost, and McKenna's willingness to risk everything for what was right. These choices changed not just their own lives, but the future of everyone who would benefit from their sacrifice. Their legacy lives on in every person who chooses to question authority when authority serves injustice. In everyone who believes that love can bridge any gap, even the one between law and outlaw. In anyone who understands that sometimes the most wanted people are exactly the ones we need most. Emma was just a sheriff's daughter who refused to accept that the badge always makes the man good. Jesse was just a farmer's son who wouldn't let his father's murder go unpunished. Sheriff McKenna was just a lawman who remembered that his first duty was to justice, not to the people who perverted it. What would you have done if you'd been in Emma's position, torn between loyalty to your father and belief in the man he was hunting? More importantly, what will you do the next time you have to choose between what's safe and what's right? Sometimes the most precious love stories begin with impossible choices. Sometimes the most important battles are fought by ordinary people who refuse to accept that extraordinary corruption is just the way things are. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to fight for truth, you discover that love really can conquer anything, even when the odds seem impossible. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and justice? When you had to decide between supporting someone you loved and supporting what you believed was right, which choice did you make? Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories for more incredible tales of love that defies expectations and justice that triumphs over corruption. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might remind you that the most beautiful love stories are the ones where two people fight for something bigger than themselves. Until next time, remember, every heart that chooses love over fear makes the world a little more just, And every person who fights for truth makes impossible dreams a little more possible. The frontier may be gone, but the need for courage, integrity, and the willingness to stand up for what's right remains as urgent today as it was in 1884. Keep believing in love that changes everything, justice that's worth fighting for, and the possibility that sometimes, when good people refuse to give up, they really can change the world. Sometimes the sheriff's daughter knows more about justice than the sheriff, and sometimes that's exactly what the world needs most.